In the early 2000s, Africa had one of the youngest populations. They were eager to work, they were vibrant. There were some tech minds, but here was the problem. There was no infrastructure as well as there were no jobs. And most importantly, there wasn't global access. But across the Atlantic, there was a different set of crises. So they had these jobs, they had the infrastructure, there were opportunities, but they had shortage of engineers that were talking about tech engineers. So they were looking to hire lots of tech engineers, if you ask me. Now, here was the birth of Andela. So Jeremy Johnson already had a reputation in education technology. Over time, he was already co-founding To You. It was an online platform that connected with universities, to help them prefer educational services. Now, he believed that education could actually change economies, but over time, he began to think deeper because he understood that, with the rise of technology and digital, geography now meant less. Christina Sass was already rooted in youth development and international education. So over time, before time, she was already working paid employment, in the educational sectors, in educational initiatives in Kenya, China, Nigeria, and Gaza. So she saw it firsthand that there was a problem. Now, what was this problem? She saw that a lot of Africans were multi-talented, but, there was a breach, there was a gap, if you'd ask me, because these people or these Africans that had this vast knowledge were not giving the opportunities that they deserve because there were no global access. So she actually believed that talent was universal, but opportunity wasn't. Then came Inyoluwa Aboyeji. Born in Nigeria in 1991, he was relentless and he was driven. He later went ahead to co-found or to be part of a billion-dollar tech enterprise that actually changed, the tech space, talking about Flutterwave, but Andela was what actually changed the stratosphere. Unlike every other person, Inyoluwa Aboyeji never believed that Africa's best exports was oil. He actually believed strongly that our best exports were our talents. In 2014, 6 founders came together: Jeremy Johnson, Christina Sass, Inyoluwa Aboyeji, Nadaya Enegesi, Bryce Nkengza, and Ian Cannavale. Their idea sounded almost impossible. Find Africa's best software developers, train them, and connect them to companies globally to work remotely. At the time, remote work was not mainstream. So it was hard for investors to buy into this dream. So at this point, this was actually the time where remote job was not actually rampant. So it's just saying, you're starting off with something and, people don't actually know about it yet. So it's, they're basically very skeptical. It's just like investors trying to, put their money into a big idea. They know actually it's a big idea, but the idea is actually sounding like a dinosaur. So they're like kind of skeptical to say, would this work? Would this not work? Would I, put my feet into it? Would I test the water? So it was a bit, skeptical, and it was a bit hard to, get investors to buy into the idea, because at that time, it sounded, like a dinosaur to think that companies in America and, the likes would actually hire tech engineers and tech minds, from Nigeria and Africa alike. So Andela launched its first recruitment circle in 2014. A lot of people applied, but just a handful was picked. Now, looking at the company's record, it was stated that, Andela actually got over 700 applications, and this was just for 4 vacant positions. Now you see how crazy that might be. So now we're looking at the rigidity of the assessment process, the interviews. Now you could tell that there were, lots of interviews. There were assessment tests, coding tests, you could name it. Now, if you'd ask, I would say that Andela basically was not looking for, just to hire any kind of tech man. They just say, I just want to hire a tech engineer. They were actually looking to hire somebody with an extraordinary mindset and extraordinary thinking, because they were looking at, it's just like our first time putting somebody from Africa on the global space. It's just like saying, this is a piece of our product that we're putting out, and we actually want you to, accept this product because it's the first time. So it's just me saying, take, for example, you're a baker and you've gotten a contract, globally to actually prepare the first ever akara. And, you're going to be very meticulous about this process, looking at the specific type of bean that you're going to be using, how it's going to be blended, the smooth processes, the ingredients that you're going to be putting in this, and how it's going to be turning out, as well as packaging and branding. So I think all these things constituted how the 2014 recruitment cycle actually went in. And for the fact that a lot of people, saw this as a very good initiative and a platform, like, you could actually be in Nigeria and be in your house in Surulere and, get paid in dollars for the first time. A lot of people applied, but like I said, it was a very rigorous testing for Andela. Andela's model was ambitious. Developers entered a multi-year fellowship. They were trained intensely, then embedded into global engineering teams. The startup essentially became a bridge between African talent and Silicon Valley demand, and slowly it began to work. In 2015, Andela raised a $10 million Series A round led by Spark Capital. Now, at this point, this was when, they began to get noticed. There were investors coming in and, a lot of companies were subscribing and, it began to look like the picture was going to get big because, that thing that happens when, you're trying to get your company off the ground. A lot of people might not actually see it, becoming big until when some, let's say top minds and top investors and top companies started buying into your ideas. And, the rest of them will be like, okay, I think this is actually the time to buy, into the Andela idea. So this was actually what was happening in 2015. And now in 2016 came the Chan Zuckerberg initiative, and this actually helped Andela build a $24 million Series B round. And this was actually the time where Mark Zuckerberg actually visited Nigeria for the first time in 2016. And, it was actually his first visit in sub-Saharan Africa. And for the first time in modern tech history, Africa's tech engineers were no longer looked at as charity cases, but as global elites. Now, that point where you've actually brought your product and it's been tested and trusted. A lot of people love it, especially, let's say, for instance, we're talking about, you having that opportunity to bring Akara to the global stage, and it tastes so well in the mouths of investors globally. You know how that sounds. This was how it was for Andela at the time. Andela scaled aggressively in Uganda, Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, you name it. And in 2017, they actually got their funding of over $80 million. Now, this was actually the game changer, because, Andela saw a future of, people actually sitting in their homes and working remotely and getting paid for it. And, this was actually at the time where remote work was not actually very, very rampant or very common as we can see today. But Andela foresaw the future and they followed suit. Andela's engineers were already working with global companies abroad as tech engineers even before the word remote came to play. Now, then came 2018. The rise of the pandemic, and a lot of companies actually transitioned remote, and the word remote started becoming a thing of the norm. But for Andela, it was we've already been here, we actually foresaw this, and we followed suit and we put something into place. So it's just like saying we were like the founding fathers. We would say Andela was like the founding fathers of remote work in Africa, so to speak. In 2020, Andela transitioned to remote work fully. But success doesn't come with controversy. Remember initially that Andela's business model were finding tech minds, train them and connect them with these people or these companies that actually need these services. But hold on a minute. They were actually training for junior developers. But as time went on, it started dawning on the companies or these global companies that they actually wanted mid-level and senior level tech engineers, and there was a big problem. In 2019, the company laid off hundreds of its junior engineers, and this came a lot of criticism because a lot of people were like, they actually abandoned these actual people that actually started a company with them, the ones that they promised a global platform and they promised a new life. So, it was hard for Andela, but I felt at this time, being a CEO or, Running a tech company that's as large as that, you need to take very hard decisions. And, sometimes these decisions, come with doing some things that a lot of people might not like. So that, that led to the decision of laying over 100 staff in Andela. And they actually did this and changed their business model. Andela transformed from a training-focused company into a global talent marketplace. It expanded beyond Africa. The mission evolved and the debate began. Was this still the same Andela, or had the company become something entirely different? In 2021, the company raised $200 million in Series E funding, putting Andela at a valuation of $1.5 billion. Now, if you ask me, that ain't no joke. Today, Andela operates globally, connecting technologists from more than 135 countries. The company says its ecosystem now reaches millions of developers worldwide. But perhaps Andela's greatest achievement cannot be measured in funding rounds or valuations. It changed perception. It forced global tech companies to reconsider where brilliance could come from. And it helped ignite a generation of African startups. Companies like Flutterwave, Paystack, Interswitch would rise during the same era of African tech acceleration. Maybe Andela's real product was never software developers. Come to think of it, maybe it was belief. Belief that a kid from Kigali, Kampala, Nairobi, Kenya, Nigeria could actually compete with others on the global scale.